This is Chicago. At the dawn of the 21st century, Chicago's media was dominated by a handful of major corporations. But a resistance movement arose to free Chicago's media from their clutches. One player in this movement is the Chicago Independent Media Center and its TV show, Chicago Independent Television. The Independent Media Center is a worldwide network of grassroots correspondents committed to using the tools of the media for promoting social and economic justice. You are watching this month's dispatch from the Chicago Independent Media Center.
Welcome to Chicago Independent Television, a collection of progressive video reports by grassroots media workers produced free from corporate or commercial support or interest. I'm your host, Mike Callis. In this episode, we'll join with two recent Chicago protests, one against the agribusiness giant Monsanto and another against the proposed Keystone XL oil pipeline. We'll also learn more about the controversial NATO 3 case, and we'll investigate the impeachment procedures against the mayor of Chicago. Stay with us.
Chicago Independent Television is not brought to you by Coca-Cola, whose logo is stained red by the blood of murdered Colombian labor union organizers. Learn more at killercoke.org. Coke, the drink of the death squads. Welcome back to Chicago Independent Television. The agribusiness giant Monsanto was the focus of recent protests in dozens of cities worldwide, including a protest in Chicago, as we'll see more in this segment.
Anybody who tries to rule all the world's food is not right in my opinion.
They want us to support farming methods that pollute our soil, our air, our water, but we're going to tell them no!
More than 1,676 patents on seeds and plants. It began as a purveyor of controversial chemicals like Agent Orange, and Fortune magazine named it possibly America's most feared corporation.
2012, an epidemic swept through commercial bee colonies, killing up to 50% of the nation's bee colonies used to pollinate crops for farmers.
One of the main reasons that we are getting fat and sick, and the reason we don't know why, is because of Monsanto! Number one is Clarence Thomas, former attorney for Monsanto, later appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Number two, Linda Fisher, Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for Monsanto, later appointed to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as Deputy Administrator. And number three is our prime example, which has a long history in our government and Monsanto. His career, well, first of all, his name is Michael Taylor. Michael Taylor's career began in 1976 as a staff attorney for the FDA. 1981, he was a lawyer for a firm called the King and Spalding that serves Monsanto. From there, he went in 1991 as Deputy Commissioner for Policy at the FDA, and then later Administrator for the USDA. Then Taylor returned to Monsanto to become Vice President for Public Policy. It doesn't end right there, it keeps going. Then in 2009, he returned to become Senior Advisor to the FDA, and now he is the Deputy Commissioner for Foods in the FDA.
all the different countries that either ban GMOs altogether or at least restrict the labeling. And our country is just completely bought out by them. So
find a place of love. Do not negate your emotions. Some of you might get angry just like me, or you might feel fear. It's okay. For us to move forward, we have to do this from a place of love.
Up to 2012, Monsanto spent $62 million lobbying our government, and members of Monsanto's board of directors have held positions in our government since the 80s. This condition is worsening nationally, but felt even more deeply in developing countries. Food and Water Watch poured over thousands of cables released on WikiLeaks and found that U.S. embassies have attempted to burnish Monsanto's image. The U.S. State Department has exercised diplomatic persuasion to bolster Monsanto, facilitating field testing and approval of Monsanto crops. This means that our tax dollars have subsidized and nurtured Monsanto's expansion abroad. Is this what we want? No! Unfortunately, our tax dollars are working against us at home as well. In 2009, the United States had 93% of its soybeans and 80% of its corn grown and subsidized by Monsanto with their patented genes. GE food companies are not only pervasive, but they sell foods that are untested. Companies submit their own safety testing data, and independent research on GE foods is limited because biotechnology companies prohibit us for cultivating their products for our research purposes. Safety concerns should result in a halt to all sales of genetically engineered foods today.
Tip of the iceberg. This is just a small amount of what's coming. There are 90% of people, Republicans, Democrats, Green Party people, everybody who wants mandatory labeling so we can avoid this stuff.
How are you going to know what food is GMO? That's why we need labeling, so you can vote for non-GMO. When you stop buying GMO food, when you see that label, those GMO foods will be off the shelf. Off the shelf. So that's why we need labeling.
My name is Mike Dershman with the Organic Consumer Association, and today we're at the March Against Monsanto. So, why we're here today at the State of Illinois building, we want our policymakers to realize how many we are. At the federal level, they've been doing their best to ignore us. Corporations to the revolving door, hiring people right from Monsanto to run the FDA and USDA. That ain't gonna cut it anymore. We are going around the federal government and going to the state level to get our mandatory labeling laws so we have the right to choose. We need to go to our policymakers, the state policymakers, the Senate, the state Senate, and the state House in our different districts. We need to start organizing, going to their offices, talking to them, organizing in their districts, letting them know exactly how many people in those districts want mandatory labeling.
I'm Jerry Boyle of the National Lawyers Guild, and you're watching Chicago Independent Television.
Oh, great rainbows and thunderstorms of our Creator's
brainstorms, far and wide
across the world. Our pure water.
Others are at harm. Please be a guide
for the protectors of our waters
and lands. May you break
in parts of your canyon red,
sunset orange, corn,
pollen yellow, seas, oceans,
lakes of blue, and mountain purples for all peoples of each color across the world. To defend
our Mother Earth. She needs our help.
For she is our
life, and her water is our blood.
Welcome back to Chicago Independent Television. President Obama was in Chicago for a fundraising event at the Hilton, which drew a protest over environmental issues, including the proposed controversial Keystone XL oil pipeline. We'll join the protests and learn more about what's at stake in this next segment. Stay tuned.
I'm here to let Obama know that there are millions of people in this country who are watching his actions, and that we don't want the Keystone XL pipeline to be built.
We are opposing the Keystone XL pipeline, and also more locally, we are opposing the fact that BP is dumping tar sands refinery waste into the south end of Lake Michigan.
I'm from the Illinois Coalition for a Moratorium on Fracking. That's moveon.org, who is going to deliver tomorrow 10,000 petition signatures to 32 district offices for the moratorium. Yep, Move On Illinois. And so they're one of our partners, PDA, SAFE, Southern Illinoisans Against Fracturing Our Environment. There's a really nice coalition that is for a moratorium on fracking. We think that fracking is extremely dangerous, and we need to investigate it far greater in this state. We've been down lobbying in Springfield for weeks, and the reps and senators didn't even know what fracking was. They don't even know the extent of it. We've had to bring in just articles and papers and just constantly, repeatedly teach them what's going on here. And still, the number one thing that the reps and senators in Springfield tell us is that they will vote the way Sierra Club tells them to vote. So, if you give me a second, I want to tell you, Sierra Club came out last week. They were for the moratorium and for the regulatory bill. Then last week they said, oh, we're for the moratorium. But 30 reps and senators this past weekend told us personally that behind closed doors, Jack Darren and Jen Hensley from the Sierra Club are still asking them to vote for the regulatory. The counties do not have a clue what's coming down to. They're going to have to spend a fortune on emergency services, okay, to be able to handle the accidents that occur on these frac fields. Also the roads, there's thousands of trucks that bring in millions of gallons of water, and then they take out millions of gallons of toxic, possibly radioactive wastewater. So it's trucks all over the place. They dig up the road. I wanted to send Obama a message, and that is no pipelines, no XL, no fracking, because fracking has a huge greenhouse gas footprint. Professor Ingrafia at Cornell Fracture Group has determined that all of these wells that they're dropping, and there's 400,000 wells across America, they will all leak methane and volatile organic compounds. It is only a matter of time. 5% leak immediately, 50% leak within 15 to 16 years, and 100% will leak. So it's just straws going down, leaking methane. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. Overall, it's about 33 times more potent than CO2. So that puts fracking the number 2 greenhouse gas emitter in America. And people sometimes say to me, well, where are we going to get our natural gas for, like, cooking and things like that? We only tap 10% of our biogas, and that is from wastewater treatment plants, from landfills, from CAFOs, right? All of the cows, right? All their poop. So poop power. In Rwanda, they are actually powering their public buildings with poop power. They gasify their poop, which is a renewable resource, last time I checked, and they are turning it into methane. We are doing it right here at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. They are building a gasifier to gasify our poop and run their buildings on that. So it is already here. We don't need to destroy the Shawnee National Forest, starved rock for the frack sands, the Mohammed Aquifer that's below Peoria, Champaign. It's a drinking water for 850,000 people. We don't just have to destroy that. We don't have to shove 700 to 900 different carcinogenic chemicals in the ground and use up millions of gallons of water for fracking. We do not have to do that. It is all about the profits of the oil and natural gas company, and we need to say no, not only to the tar sands, but to the fracking.
Mining for natural gas is unprotected relations with Mother Earth. It should not be allowed.
Hey there, I'm Matthew Filipovich, comedian, cartoonist, and talk show host, and you are watching Chicago Independent Television.
And when all this stuff started happening with the school closings and then the immediate announcement about DePaul getting all these TIF funds for a new stadium, I just thought something smelled rotten. So I reached out to some faculty and reached out to some fellow alumni, and I decided to start a petition. And the petition took off. I got over 600 signatures in like 48 hours, and now we're doing a protest, just a peaceful protest, a friendly protest for those faculty members who wrote a letter to the president of DePaul stating their concern with the DePaul Stadium project. So they're closing 49 Chicago public schools because they're saying there's a lack of funds, and all the while they're opening up a stadium for DePaul University, which is a wonderful university, but it's also a private university, and they're planning on giving them $55 million in TIF funds. And the stadium is planned to be by McCormick Place, and DePaul is in Lincoln Park. And as a DePaul alumni, knowing what students do, they're not going to go to McCormick Place to go see basketball games. They want to stay in Lincoln Park, where there's places to go afterwards and things to do. So it's a gross misuse of funds.
Welcome back to Chicago Independent Television. The case of the NATO 3 has drawn attention over its harsh punishment of protesters. We'll learn more about the case in this next segment.
In September of 2011, Occupy Wall Street began as a mass demonstration which led to the encampment of Zuccotti Park in New York City. Originally ignored by mainstream media, the movement would eventually capture the world's imagination. The energy built off of this global movement led to occupations of public space around the world and the largest demonstration against the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, ever. Demonstrators in Chicago built towards the NATO Summit by highlighting the military violence overseas and inequality here at home. Activists deemed the period of time leading up to the NATO Summit the Chicago Spring, spending months organizing actions addressing public health clinic closures, home evictions, environmental degradation, labor and immigrant rights, along with community building. If the city could afford to pay millions to showcase Chicago as a, quote, world-class city to the global elite, why couldn't it afford to spend money on public services for its citizens? This watershed moment was confronted with severe police brutality and massive surveillance of activists and citizens at large. Beyond the horrific attacks on protesters during the NATO Summit, in the months leading up to the demonstrations, the Chicago Police Department used undercover agents Mehet Uygun and Nadia Chico to infiltrate the Occupy movement. These agents sought to manufacture a criminal case that would justify bloated security spending and discredit protesters. Brent Betterly, Brian Church, and Jared Chase, 3 Occupy activists from Florida, were targeted and arrested to intimidate public protest. After months of organizing and multiple actions, the NATO protest concluded on May 21st. 1 year later, Brent, Brian, and Jared, collectively known as the NATO 3, are still incarcerated. The trial date has been set for September 16th, a day before the second anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. The actions taken against these 3 activists still held in Chicago could have been unleashed upon anyone who encountered the Chicago police surveillance dragnet. These cases are a dangerous example of how law enforcement and city officials can tarnish the names of activists to shape the narrative for financial gain. It is crucial that every person who believes in the power of people's movements to oppose military violence and economic austerity stand with the NATO 3 as they approach their trial. Their legal team, led by the People's Law Office and the National Lawyers Guild, need at least $30,000 for expert witness costs, data storage, document filing, and other trial fees. In May, the NATO 3 Support Committee has called for a national week of fundraising to achieve this goal. We need every person who has stood with Occupy in the past, every boot in the street for the NATO Summit last year, and any person who has ever protested the forces of social oppression to come together and help build the NATO 3 Legal Defense Fund.
Hi, I'm Bourbon Supreme, and whenever I'm watching some sort of moving images on a screen, it's indie media for sure.
Remember that if you're out and about this weekend, many streets and highways will be closed.
At McCormick Place, site of next week's NATO Summit, this nation's largest convention center is becoming its most impregnable stronghold. Nearby storefronts are boarded up as if for a hurricane, but this storm is man-made.
Mayor 1% Emanuel has issued an invitation to NATO's warmongers to invade Chicago.
Security is high around the city, especially the downtown area.
Do not let the city of Chicago intimidate you from exercising your First Amendment rights.
The system is failing most of the people in some ways, and people are in the streets.
NATO has got to go.
They're able to pay for this war machine all around the world by cutting back on every social program right here and keeping people more and more divided.
Attention. This is the Chicago Police Department. You are engaging in unlawful conduct.
If we were starting a new community, would this be why we create police? Holding in a democratic demonstration? What are we to them? What are we? I served this country honorably. I stood up to defend what I thought was a good idea, what I thought was my fellow Americans. And now they're gonna put police on the streets to cage me in? This is a democracy. They answer to us. They answer to us.
We will continue to play our full part in building a world that is safer and more secure.
Welcome back to Chicago Independent Television. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel has engaged in a list of unpopular actions. Many people are talking about impeachment. So how do you impeach the mayor of Chicago? Chicago Independent Television investigated.
Okay. I'm being forwarded to Jim. Hello, Jim. My name is Mitchell Strapinchik. I live in the 47th Ward, and I've got a question about local Chicago government. I've heard a lot of questions about online, but I've not been able to get an answer online or from anyone. I'm wondering if you might be able to help. What is the local law with regards to either impeaching or recalling the mayor of Chicago? Is there a provision for that? there is no provision for the recall of a mayor. Sorry, go ahead. I see. So there is a provision for recalling the governor of the state of Illinois. There are no so one cannot either impeach or recall either the mayor or any elected city officials. Okay. So you're looking it up? Okay, the rules of order. Okay, but there's no provision. Like if I say wanted to, I don't know. And I've heard a lot of people, especially regarding recent controversies regarding the mayor, that there's been a lot of talk regarding impeachment or recall. And so I thought to myself, well, how would you do that? Or is that even possible? And it sounds like that from what you're telling me, that's not. We just have to wait until the next time an election rolls around. Right. Sure. I see. Okay. I see. Okay. All right. Anyway, thank you so much for your help, Jim. Okay. Yep. You too. Bye. The only way that a mayor of Chicago would actually have to be removed is if he or she were to be actually convicted of a crime. And then, at least in theory, although this actually isn't spelled out practically in practice, the council could then vote to remove the mayor from office. But otherwise, there is no provision in local city government for the removal of either the mayor of Chicago or an elected city official from office. You basically have to wait until the election. Frankly, this strikes me as a little bit worrisome that we have to wait once every 4 years before action can be taken in order to try to remove a person from elected office if it turns out that they're, for whatever reason, not deemed to be fit to hold office. But at least now we know what the law is and hopefully can work to change that.